In February 1895, Oscar Wilde was at the height of his powers. He was an internationally celebrated writer with a peerless reputation for wit and wordplay. He was instrumental in popularising decadent literature, writing that had a fascination with morbidity, eroticism, and the liberation of art from the strict and suffocating confines of Victorian morality. Wilde's brilliance and influence was unparalleled. But in less than 3 months after the startling success of his final play, The Importance of Being Earnest, Wilde's world came tumbling down. He was arrested for the crime of gross indecency and suffered a sudden, painful and humiliating downfall. As a result, the decadent literary and artistic movement and all it stood for came tumbling down after him. Or did it? This video is a tale of morality, sin, and political, artistic, and social turbulence that characterised the end of the 19th century, otherwise known as the fin de siècle. This video is an exploration of Oscar Wilde's reputation and writing, namely his 1895 play, The Importance of Being Earnest. And this video is, perhaps above all else, a delve into decadence. Writing and art that was sensual, sexual, superficial, riddled with artifice and obsessed with morbidity, but also, crucially, served to shake things up, to challenge in a dramatic and powerful way accepted Victorian norms, to sow the seeds of anarchy. In his scathing 1892 social critique, Degeneration, Max Nordau calls Oscar Wilde's writing buffoon mummery and tortuously disdainful prattling. He also goes after what he calls Wilde's personal eccentricities, the way he comports himself in society, the way he dresses, which is all motivated by a hysterical craving to be noticed, to occupy the attention of the world with himself, to get talked about. In this chapter of his book, Nordau is criticising decadence and aesthetes, artists belonging to the aesthetic and decadent movements, and amongst whom Wilde was a prominent player. To Nordau, these creatures are of absolutely no use to the Commonwealth. They are parasites, imitators who have nothing of their own to say, no emotion, not an idea, who dream only of the satisfaction of their basest instincts. Safe to say, he's not a fan. Now, we might read this and think, wow, Nordau sounds like a bit of a nutcase extremist with a chip on his shoulder, but his contemporaries did not cast him aside as quickly as we might be inclined to do today. The decadent movement and the character of the aesthete came under scrutiny, became a source of parody, and indeed was criticised for promoting superficiality. And sure, with bejewelled tortoises, flamboyant outfits, and a seeming disregard for seriousness and morality, it might be easy to assume that all this glitz makes up for a lack of substance. But I believe there's a lot more to these writers promenading about in their fabulous attire. I believe that decadent writing is some of the most subversive, radical, and politically charged in the English-speaking literary canon. But first, welcome. My name is Dr. Rosie Whitcombe, this is The Lady Mouse, and we make videos on spooky literature, gothic novels, games, films, and poetry, and all kinds of literary goodness, so please subscribe if that's your jam. I'm also very happy to announce that we now have a Patreon, so I'd like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to our lovely Books and Cats patrons for supporting us. If you fancy it and can afford it, please feel free to support us on Patreon. I'll put a link in the description, but of course, absolutely no pressure to do that. And one more bit of housekeeping before we get stuck in. Please be aware that this video will discuss homophobia. Do you ever have that shocking realisation that a word or a phrase that you use doesn't mean what you thought it meant? To your horror, you find out you've been using it incorrectly for years. I, it turns out, totally misunderstood the meaning of the proverbial phrase, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So apparently, it means when life gives you something bad, i.e. lemons, make something good out of it. The lemonade. But I thought it meant when life gives you something good, the lemons, make something better, the lemonade. Like, seize the day, seize good opportunities that come your way. What's wrong with lemons? Lemons are great. A lemon isn't something bad you need to make the most out of. I will die on this hill. But lemons aside, it's weird, isn't it? When you realise something means something else. This happened to me again, more recently, when I was writing this very script and looking up official dictionary definitions of decadence. The adjective decadence, according to the OED, is something in a state of decay or decline, falling off or deteriorating from a prior condition of excellence, vitality, prosperity, etc. The Cambridge Dictionary is perhaps a little more concise in their definition. A decadent person or group has low moral standards. Enter Nordau. Now, when I first read this, it really surprised me, but maybe it shouldn't have. If I thought about it a bit more, I might have realised that decadent is just a hop and a skip away from decay. If I knew any Latin, I might have also noticed that decadent comes from the verb decadere, meaning to fall or to sink. But all my life, I thought it meant luxurious, delicious, indulgent, sumptuous, gorgeous, basically this cake, or this cake, or this cake. And I'm not alone. According to this article, among the most common things we describe as decadent are chocolate, dessert, rich, treat, dinner, and slice, presumably a slice of cake. So, to glean further information, I turned to the lovely members of the Books and Cats Discord server and asked them what they thought decadent meant. And this was very interesting. I received an intriguing array of answers, from sinful and self-indulgent to syrupy, dense and lush. But again, there seemed to be a common understanding that decadent was connected to richness, sweet, tooth-rotting food, and hedonistic indulgence. So, cake. Or, as one member of the Discord pointed out, cookies. In French-speaking Quebec, you can buy a brand of cookies called Decadent, even though, as they pointed out, the only true definition of decadent in French is the loss of civilization. These cookies are so good, they cause society to collapse. So, we might be tempted to ask, how did decadence change meaning so dramatically? How did it go from immorality and decay to cake and cookies? But I would argue the more relevant question is, how are they related? How far is the rich, creamy, indulgent cake inextricably linked to Nordau's fears for the moral degeneration of humanity? To answer these questions, let's turn the clock back a mere 130 years and dive cake fork first into the decadent literary scene. Other than what we've gleaned from Nordau's rage, how best to understand this artistic and literary movement? Well, crucial to any understanding is the aestheticist idea of art for art's sake, rather than art for didactic moral instruction. Rather than writing geared towards social improvement, this is writing epitomised by novelty, sensuousness and sensuality, morbid themes, and excessive focus on style at the expense of content. Decadent writer Arthur Symons described the decadent movement as a new and beautiful and interesting disease. Now, you might be thinking, well, Nordau's a bit much, but he kind of has a point. This all sounds pretty superficial. This is writing that has no overarching moral purpose. It's style over substance, and though it's beautiful, it is, nonetheless, a disease. But what is disease, if not being put at dis-ease? This is art that is deliberately designed to make you uneasy, to take you out of your comfort zone, to force you to consider a new perspective. This idea of art for art's sake isn't quite as surface-level glitz as you might initially suppose. It poses a challenge to accepted norms, to gender roles, to industry, to capitalism, to the idea that everything has to have a purpose or a meaning. Of course, you can bet your bottom dollar that Nordau wasn't a fan of this way of thinking. He argued that a work of art is not its own aim, but it has a specially organic and a social task. It is subject to the moral law. It must obey this. A decadent writer would take this surety, this strict moral imperative, to task. As Denis Denisov argues, art and literature produced as part of the decadent movement refuse to allow society to pretend that it can know one objective reality, or that progress to any sustainable ideal is even manageable. And it's not that decadent writers offer an alternative to capitalism, industry and progress. They recognise the fleeting and unsustainable nature of their own values and ideals, but they also recognise the fleeting and unsustainable nature of everyone else's. They don't pretend that there's one surefire way of doing things. They recognise that it's all, inevitably, going to come crashing down. So, in the meantime, why not enjoy the rich, beautiful, indulgent cake? Why not take your hedonism as far as it will go? Enjoy all that glitters while it's still glittering. And through this indulgence, break down those systems that keep you restrained. This is an interesting paradox I'm discovering about decadence, that in many ways it was through hedonism, through a resistance to active progress, that these writers and artists actually made progress, and the way people thought about sexuality, gender, and industry started to change. Although art for art's sake withdrew from all political and ideological concerns, it was nonetheless radical in rejecting the moralising standards of its day. Artists such as Aubrey Beardsley delighted in shocking polite taste through images which had sexual or grotesque overtones. In this regard, art for art's sake was often implicitly radical. Decadence became synonymous with subversion. Think of social and sexual transgression. Think of writing that probes into the tightly strapped late Victorian literary canon and pries it apart. And believe you me, the tightly strapped late Victorian literary canon was very tightly strapped indeed. Morality was the word of the day. The latter half of the Victorian period saw something of a Puritan revival. There were calls for a ban of the nude in art, led by John Calcott Horsley, writing under the pen name The British Matron, who called for a noble crusade of purity to check the rank profligacy that abounds in our land. Another advocate of the same cause insisted that, for the welfare of our country, we must decry and discountenance with all our powers these stealthy, steadfast advances of the cloven foot. And an 1884 pamphlet warned that to keep yourself pure, you must set yourself against sensuous literature and art as resolutely as against foul-tongued companions. An artist or writer, whether in poetry or prose, who knowingly uses his talents to excite the animal passions, is a mental prostitute. Side note, I found all these incredible quotes in this book, which is an anthology of decadent short stories. So if you want to read more about these noble, moralising crusaders and the kind of writing that pissed them off, give it a read. Now, these moralisers weren't just a group of ineffectual loudmouths. They were part of a powerful force in British society. And by the mid-1800s, they were actively opposing and restricting artists, writers and performers. Why? Well, challenging established norms was, and is, a provocative thing to do. And at the turn of the 19th century, people were invested in a particular way of being. They were afraid of change and, perhaps more specifically, of anarchy. Nordau even explicitly states this in amongst his insults towards Wilde and his fellow parasites. Decadent is synonymous with inaptitude for regular functions and subordination to social aims, and that the consequence of decadence is anarchy and the ruin of community. This kind of provocative art is perverse, a dangerous form of self-inflicted degeneration that goes hand in hand with the most immoral of behaviour, and that risks taking the best and brightest and purest and reducing them to the gutter. Don't want to end up there? Then simply don't behave that way. Don't allow corruption to seep into your veins. Toe the path of Victorian righteousness and steer clear of moral, political, social and sexual deviance. Easy peasy. But what if the straight and narrow just isn't for you? What if your life and work is wholeheartedly, inevitably, deeply decadent? Well, you might end up in hell or in prison, but you'll be in excellent company. In February 1895, Oscar Wilde was the shining star of the London literary scene. He wrote to acclaim and became somewhat of a poster boy for decadence, but as high as he rose, just as far would he fall. As Melvyn Bragg tells us,
he was known on both sides of the Atlantic. He was feted in London society and celebrated in the West End, where an ideal husband continued to play to packed houses as The Importance of Being Earnest opened to ecstatic reviews. Quote, "The man who can dominate a London dinner table can dominate the world," unquote, he's reputed to have said. And he seemed on course to do just that. But in April of that year, he was arrested for the crime of gross indecency, and his swift descent from omnipotence began. It ended 5 years later when, exiled and humiliated, he died famously beyond his means in a Paris hotel.
Gross indecency, Wilde's crime, meant taking part in any homosexual act in public or private, aside from the far worse crime of sodomy, that's male homosexual penetrative sex, for which people were tried less often, but which carried a life sentence in prison and, until as recently as 1861, was punishable by death. Wilde served 2 years in prison after being accused of having romantic and sexual relationships with men, notably Lord Alfred Douglas, or Bosie, whose father, the Marquess of Queensberry, led a very successful charge against Wilde, the posing sodomist. Being openly or secretly gay was considered legally, morally wrong. It railed against traditional family values, and in fact wasn't made legal in England until the 1960s. So not only was Wilde's writing itself considered decadent, but the story of his life and career is a spectacular falling off or deteriorating from a prior condition of excellence, vitality, prosperity. His fall from grace epitomised that state of decline that defines the word decadent according to the OED. And his sexuality and deviant behaviour also aligns with the Cambridge Dictionary definition that a decadent person has low moral standards. See, kids, this is what a life of hedonistic decadence will get you. It will loosen your morals and boot you off the straight and narrow. Don't read this filth. It's a sickness. It won't teach you how to be a morally upstanding member of Victorian society. It's pure, perverse pleasure. Or is that what the British matron and his roving band of moralisers want you to think? Perhaps they don't want you reading Wilde and his pals because they might get you thinking. Might get you to realise that a lot of this so-called decadent literature is a vehicle for political and social critique. On Valentine's Day, 1895, brandishing his signature green carnation, Oscar Wilde made his way to St James's Theatre to watch the premiere of The Importance of Being Earnest. Everything was ready and accounted for. He had been tipped off about a planned demonstration by the Marquis of Queensberry, and precautions had been taken. Despite Queensberry menacing Wilde from the sidelines, the play was met with great and nearly universal acclaim. As Joseph Donahue writes, London was alive with the reverberations of Wilde's unexampled success. And The Importance of Being Earnest is still studied, performed, and widely beloved today. It holds a place in our cultural consciousness, not least because of Edith Evans's iconic delivery of the play's most quotable line in the 1952 film adaptation.
A handbag?
But as well as the many masterly performances throughout the years, and the brilliant comedy that still holds up 130 years later, The Importance of Being Earnest is notable for its astute and dazzling critique of Victorian society. Now, it might not seem particularly politically savvy. It's flippant, farcical, and filled to the brim with characters who care exclusively about status, wealth, and creating the reality they want, no matter the cost. So, what's so astute about it then? It's a comedy about selfish people, not struggling revolutionaries fighting against the man. But I bet Wilde has all these horrid characters face the music at the end, right? He's making an example of them by giving them their comeuppance. No. Despite their selfishness, not one of these characters learns their lesson. They all get happy endings. They all get what they want. Not one of them behaves especially earnestly, with little to no regard for sincerity, reason, or truth. Being earnest, being an earnest person, an important Victorian value, is thoroughly mocked in the play. When Jack wants to blow off steam and shirk his responsibilities in the city, he pretends he is attending to his made-up brother Ernest, and while he's gallivanting in London, he goes by the name Ernest. Soon after Cecily meets Algernon, thinking he is Jack's brother Ernest, she fabricates their courtship, literally just makes it up to suit her desires. Being earnest, telling the truth, doesn't serve these characters. Lying, fabricating, and acting with impulsive abandon gets them what they desire. So they're not morally great. In fact, they're all pretty terrible, but this doesn't mean that The Importance of Being Earnest is a purely hedonistic, chaotic, morally deviant play that celebrates or promotes being a total dickhead. Wilde's cast of unpleasant aristocrats functions as a critique of the thoughtlessness and self-absorption of Victorian aristocratic society. There is anarchy here. Wilde dismantles so many different, important, sacred Victorian institutions and exposes their insidious potential. The practice of christening, for example, becomes a source of mockery. Algernon and Jack decide to get christened or rechristened, not for religious, devotional purposes, but for social ones. They both want to take the name Ernest to win the hearts of Gwendolen and Cecily. The sanctity of marriage is also heavily satirised. Gwendolen and Cecily are only interested in marrying men named Ernest, and it's this idea of marrying someone with that name that motivates them. This isn't a sacred union before God, it's a nonsensical performance of status. Jack even stages a funeral for his fake brother Ernest, and Algernon reports the death of his fake friend Mr. Bunbury, to which Lady Bracknell responds,
I'm glad, however, that he made up his mind at the last to some definite course of action.
These vital pillars of Christianity that signify and dignify different stages of a proper, upstanding moral life are made utterly absurd. Stringent Victorian gender roles are often reversed or challenged, and the idea of Christian duty, of charity, is ridiculed. When Jack and Algernon go off Bunburying, a term which essentially means gallivanting and getting up to no good, they're pretending to look after a struggling relation or an ill friend. Everything we think is important, milestones we work hard to achieve, a stable family life, a secure and loving marriage, religious devotion, and being a morally upstanding, earnest individual is rendered meaningless. By ridiculing these stalwart institutions and showing their meaninglessness, Wilde challenges how meaning is ascribed, challenges the way we assign purpose. And isn't that what decadence is all about? showing up the fragility and hypocrisy and unsustainability of those attitudes, ideas, or institutions that we think are steadfast, showing up the flaws in a system that convinces you it's the only way. Low moral standards only means what we allow it to mean. Heterosexual marriage is only the only option because we've decided it's the proper way to love. But what if we explode all that? Get rid of the gross indecency and the prudishness and the straight-laced morality and order, and see what else could be. Shrouded in absurd, farcical humour and chock full of provocative caricatures that make you think while making you laugh. This is covert cultural anarchy at its finest. So, to return to the question we were asking at the start of the video, did decadence end with Wilde? Well, you could argue that the movement itself did, but the spirit of challenge, of change, of pushing or entirely exploding societal boundaries in literature did not end with Wilde's downfall and death. You can see the seeds of anarchy grow and thrive in the works of countless writers after Wilde, not least in the groundbreaking modernist writing of people like Virginia Woolf or James Joyce. But as well as sparking anarchy in his writing, Wilde himself has become a symbol for hopeful and positive change. As Andrew Dixon tells us, after the decriminalisation of homosexuality in England in 1965, Wilde became an icon for a new generation, passionate about sexual freedom and civil liberties. Even for people who have never seen one of his plays or read one of his stories, Wilde's name remains a potent symbol. Not only has his life been used to campaign for gay and sexual rights across the globe, his own actions demonstrate how important it is to stand up for what you believe, even if the odds against you seem overwhelming. So, while decadence certainly has to do with having sex, eating cake, and watching the world burn, it can also be a rallying cry to break down rigid structures and see what else is possible. But what do you think? How do you interpret decadence? Is Oscar Wilde a social revolutionary or a superficial funny man? Let me know in the comments below or join us on the Discord for a more in-depth discussion. Oscar Wilde was writing at a time when people were really starting to question traditional assumptions about gender and sexuality. To learn how these ideas manifested a few decades later in the works of modernist writer Virginia Woolf, click here next.